Have you ever been driving and noticed a brand new truck pull up next to you? The kind that looks like it belongs in a showroom more than on the road? It is spotless, oversized, every detail polished to perfection. And you already know it did not come cheap. Then a thought crosses your mind. How is this even affordable? Because if you look closely, the person driving it does not seem drastically different from you. Same kind of routine, same kind of job. Nothing about their situation suggests they should be comfortably handling something that expensive. And yet, they are, at least on the surface. So what is actually happening here? Because this is not rare anymore. It's everywhere. Expensive vehicles have quietly become normal, even in places where the numbers don't seem to support it. And the explanation is not what most people assume. It's not that everyone suddenly became wealthier. It's that the system around buying cars has changed in a way that makes high costs feel manageable, even when they're not. Before getting into how that works, it helps to understand just how far things have shifted. The average car payment today has moved into a range that would have sounded unrealistic not long ago. What used to be considered a stretch is now treated as standard. And for certain types of vehicles, especially trucks and SUVs, the numbers go even higher. But the surprising part isn't just the cost, it's who's paying it. These are not outliers, they're everyday people. People with stable but ordinary incomes. People who on paper should not be comfortable taking on that level of expense. Which raises a more important question. If the income hasn't changed enough to justify the cost, what has? A large part of the answer comes down to how the purchase is structured. Car buying used to be relatively simple. Shorter loan periods, clearer trade-offs, and limits that forced decisions to stay within a certain range. That structure no longer exists in the same way. Today, the time horizon has expanded. Instead of compressing the cost into a few years, it's stretched across much longer periods. And when you extend something far enough, the immediate impact starts to feel smaller, even if the total cost increases significantly. That's where the shift happens. The focus moves away from the full price and toward the monthly number. And once that shift happens, the decision feels different. Not necessarily easier in reality, but easier to justify. But there's another layer that makes this even more convincing. The number you see each month isn't the full story. It's a carefully shaped version of it. Because beyond the payment itself, there are additional costs quietly building around it. Insurance adjusts upward, maintenance becomes more expensive, fuel consumption rises. Individually, these costs don't feel overwhelming, but together they create something much heavier. And over time, they blend into everyday spending. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. Many of these purchases don't start from zero. They carry over from previous ones. When someone upgrades before fully paying off their current vehicle, whatever remains doesn't disappear. It gets absorbed into the next deal, combined, adjusted, repackaged into a new payment structure. On the surface, it looks like a fresh start, but underneath, it's a continuation. And over time, that creates a pattern where the numbers grow, even as the payments feel familiar. The structure resets, but the weight carries forward. This is where things become less about affordability and more about momentum. Once you enter that cycle, each decision becomes easier to repeat, not because it makes more sense, but because it feels consistent with what you've already done. And consistency is powerful. It creates a sense of stability even when the structure is becoming more fragile. Then there's the psychological side. Vehicles are no longer viewed as simple tools. They've become representations of progress, of stability, of identity. And once something is tied to identity, the way it's evaluated changes. It's no longer just a cost. It becomes something that feels like it needs to be maintained, which makes higher payments easier to accept. There's a subtle shift that happens here. Instead of asking, can I afford this overall, the question becomes, can I manage this monthly? And those are not the same question. One looks at the full picture. The other focuses on a single point in time. And when decisions are made at that level, long-term consequences become less visible.
Over time, this changes how financial priorities are arranged. The payment becomes fixed. Everything else adjusts around it. Spending becomes more controlled, flexibility decreases, options narrow gradually. Not enough to feel immediate pressure, but enough to reduce breathing room. And this is where the real cost starts to show, not in the payment itself, but in what it quietly replaces. Opportunities become harder to take, unexpected expenses become more disruptive, long-term planning becomes more constrained. There's also the factor of time. When a commitment stretches far into the future, it assumes stability. Stable income, stable priorities, stable circumstances. But real life doesn't move in straight lines. Things change, and when they do, long-term obligations don't adjust easily, which means what once felt manageable can become restrictive. Each new commitment adds to the previous ones until the structure becomes more complex and harder to step out of. But perhaps the most interesting part is how normal it feels. Because when something becomes common, it stops being questioned. What once seemed excessive begins to feel expected. And once expectations shift, behavior follows. People adapt, not because it's optimal, but because it matches what they see around them. And that's how the system sustains itself, not by forcing decisions, but by shaping perception, making certain choices feel standard, making others feel unnecessary. And that brings everything back to the original question. How are people affording it? The answer is, they're not. At least not in the traditional sense. They're structuring around it, adjusting, extending, redistributing, and reframing until the numbers feel acceptable. And once they feel acceptable, they become reality. So the next time you see something on the road that doesn't seem to match the situation around it, remember this. You're not just looking at a purchase, you're looking at a system, one that is designed to make the numbers work, at least in a way that feels convincing. And once you see it that way, the picture becomes a lot clearer.